Welcome to the Umbra Vortex, where whispers begin and screams never end. Beyond this point, only madness awaits. This isn't a place for comfort, only for truth. Not the kind found in books or muttered in confession, but a raw, unfiltered reality, cloaked in shadow, stitched with dread, and pulsing just beneath the skin of sanity. I'm Edward J. Hallow, and I'll be the last voice you hear before the silence consumes you. Tonight, you'll hear a tale of warnings, and the price of ignoring them. A story where the past and future collide, and a man is trapped between two worlds. A signalman, bound to his station, haunted by visions of doom and a voice that calls from the darkness. This is the story of the signalman, where every flicker of light might be a harbinger of something far worse. It was a bitter, breathless evening when I first saw him. The sky had already surrendered to a bruised twilight, grey fading to black like a dying ember. I walked alone through the hills, the path winding like a scar through the landscape. A damp mist clung to everything, curling around the branches of twisted trees and swallowing sound. My footsteps crunched against gravel, too loud in the thick silence, and the air had that strange stillness, the kind that presses on the chest like a warning unspoken. Then I came to it. The railway cutting, a yawning gash in the earth, narrow and steep-sided, as if some great claw had torn open the hillside. Moss and ivy clung to the jagged stone walls, slick with cold dew. The track ran straight through the centre, vanishing into a tunnel whose mouth gaped like something ancient and ravenous, blacker than the mist, blacker than night. I leaned out over the edge and called, "Hallow! Below there!" What happened next unsettled me deeply. The man by the track did not startle, did not look up. Instead, he turned, slowly, stiffly, as though pulled by a string. Not to me, but toward the tunnel. He stared into its maw with an intensity that froze me where I stood. Not curiosity, expectation, dread. "Hallow! Below!" I called again, louder. This time he turned toward me. His face emerged from the haze, pale, sharp-boned, rimmed by a dark cap and soot-black hair. But what struck me most was his expression. Recognition, not surprise, not confusion, but a haunted, mournful knowing, as if he had seen me before, as if I were the one who had returned. I asked if I might descend. He gave a subtle nod, and I made my way down the zigzagging path carved into the stone. The descent was treacherous, slick with wet moss, the air thick and cold. The deeper I went, the more the world above seemed to recede. The silence grew heavier, oppressive, as though the cutting itself resented my presence. At the bottom, the man stood still as stone, a creature carved into the landscape, gaunt and spectral. He was intelligent, his words carefully chosen, his manner serious, but his eyes betrayed a deep fatigue, as though he had not truly slept in years. They flicked constantly, to the tunnel, to the bell that hung in his box, to the thickening fog that seemed to pulse at the tunnel's edge like breath from an unseen beast. He invited me into the signal box, a narrow, low-roofed chamber of rusted iron and damp stone. The fire within sputtered weakly, casting long, warping shadows across the walls. A faded logbook sat beside a flickering oil lamp, and the signal bell, small, bronze, perfectly still, hung on the far side like an executioner's chime, waiting for judgment. He tried to speak of work, of routine, but I could feel the strain behind every word. He was listening, not to me, but to something deeper, something I could not hear. And then, without warning, he stiffened. His eyes locked onto the bell. It had not moved. No sound had come. But he stood, white as bone, jaw clenched, eyes wide. A full minute passed in tense silence before he sank slowly back into his seat. When I rose to leave, he asked me for one thing. "Tomorrow, when you return, don't call down. Let me see you first. Don't speak. Not until I've looked at you." His voice shook, not with embarrassment, but fear. I promised I would do as he asked. The next night I came again. The mist was thicker, curling like smoke from some unseen fire. It coated everything, my skin, my lungs, the path, as I stood at the edge, silent. I waited until he turned and saw me, then began my descent. He looked worse, paler. His hands trembled as he poured tea, which he never drank. He sat heavily and began to speak, his voice low, hollow. He told me about the figure. It came always at dusk, always by the tunnel's mouth. A human shape, no features, just a shadow of a man, obscured by fog so dense it seemed to boil. The first time it came, it raised one arm across its face and waved the other, violently, in warning. And then it spoke. "Hallow! Below there, look out!" He had run to the tunnel, heart hammering, expecting disaster. But it was empty. Hours later, a train derailed. The passengers never stood a chance. The second time, the figure returned, hands pressed to its face in a silent gesture of grief. And that night, a young woman died on a train. A heart attack, they claimed. But the signalman knew. Now, it was back. More frequent. Lingering longer. He'd seen it at dawn, at midnight. He'd seen it outside the signal box, inches from the window, eyes that weren't eyes fixed on him through the glass. But no one else could see it. Only him. "It comes to me," he whispered, voice thin as fog. Not to warn, not to help, only to show me what I cannot stop. A messenger with no mercy. He looked at me then, not for sympathy, but for absolution. "I am not mad," he said. "I've tried to ignore it, tried to forget. But the bell rings, and I know what's next." As if summoned by his words, the bell gave a single, sharp ting. The sound cracked the air like lightning. He stood instantly, backing toward the door, staring into the tunnel's black mouth. The fog boiled around it, creeping forward. His voice came in a whisper. "It's here again. It never leaves. It only waits." I returned the next morning. The mist hung lower than ever before, dense and suffocating. I saw them from the ridge, railwaymen, standing still, waiting, faces grim. He was dead, struck by a train. The driver said he had shouted, waving his arms and calling, "Below there! Look out! For God's sake, clear the way!" But the signalman hadn't moved, hadn't even flinched. He was staring into the tunnel, waiting, or answering. They said it was an accident, that he was exhausted, delusional. But I remembered his words, his terror, and most of all, I remembered the warning, the exact words, the arm raised across the face, the other waving in frantic despair. Now, when I pass the cutting, if the fog is thick enough, if the wind is still, I swear I hear it. A faint voice, drifting up from the black mouth of the tunnel. "Hallow! Below there." And then, sometimes, just once, the bell. Ting. Some warnings are louder than others, but even the loudest can be drowned out by our own disbelief. This was the signalman, a tale of fate pulling its threads tighter, until the inevitable cannot be escaped. I'm Edward J. Hallow, and if you hear the signal tonight, it might already be too late.